You're walking home after meeting your friends, and for a while, everything still feels like it's lingering in your body. The noise, the laughter, the sense that just a moment ago, you were fully inside something real, something alive. A moment that didn't require you to think too much about yourself while it was happening. It was loud, a little chaotic, maybe even messy in the way conversations tend to be when people are comfortable. And yet, none of that felt like a problem at the time. If anything, it felt easy, natural, like you were exactly where you were supposed to be. But as you start heading home, something begins to shift in a way that's difficult to point to directly. The streets feel quieter than they should. The absence of noise becomes more noticeable than the noise itself ever was. You check your phone without really thinking about it, scroll for a moment, maybe replay parts of the night in your head, and everything still seems objectively fine. Nothing about the evening suggests that anything was missing. And yet, somewhere in that transition, as the moment fades and you're left alone with yourself again, a kind of emptiness begins to surface. Not sharply, not dramatically, but in a way that feels almost familiar, as if it has been there before, waiting for the exact moment when everything else settles down. It isn't sadness, and it doesn't quite feel like regret either. It's more like something that doesn't fully make sense. A quiet sense that, despite everything feeling complete just a short while ago, something about it didn't stay with you in the way you expected it to. You go back over the night, almost instinctively, trying to locate what might have been lacking, but the more you think about it, the less clear the answer becomes. The conversations were real. The enjoyment wasn't forced. There's no obvious reason for this feeling to be there, and that's exactly what makes it so difficult to ignore. Because this is the part no one really explains. The part where nothing is clearly wrong and yet something feels off anyway. The part where you can do everything you're supposed to do, spend time with people, stay connected, fill your day with experiences, and still find yourself, at the end of it, facing a kind of quiet emptiness that doesn't match the life you just lived a few hours ago. And at some point, the question starts to shift, almost without you noticing. It stops being about what you did or who you were with, and starts to turn towards something less obvious, something harder to name, something that has less to do with your life itself, and more to do with the way you've been taught to move through it. You try not to think too much about it at first, assuming it's just part of the transition, the natural drop that comes after being around people, as if the silence simply feels heavier because you were just surrounded by noise, so you reach for something familiar. Your phone, a distraction, anything that might soften the shift, and for a moment it works. You scroll, you replay parts of the night, you let your mind move back into what just happened, almost as if revisiting it might help you hold onto it a little longer. And the strange thing is, when you look back at it, nothing about it seems lacking. The conversations weren't empty, the laughter didn't feel forced, and you weren't sitting there wishing to be somewhere else while it was happening. If anything, you were present in a way that should have been enough, engaged in a way that should have carried some kind of weight beyond the moment itself. But as you sit with it a little longer, that expectation starts to feel less certain, because whatever you experienced doesn't seem to remain in the way you thought it would. It fades more quickly than it should, leaving behind something that feels disproportionate to what just happened, as if the emotional residue of the experience doesn't match the experience itself. So your mind begins to move, almost automatically, toward explanation. Maybe it wasn't deep enough, maybe these aren't the right people, maybe what you need isn't more of the same kind of experience, but something different, something more meaningful, something that can actually stay with you instead of dissolving the moment it ends. And for a while, that explanation feels convincing. It gives the feeling somewhere to go, something to aim at, something that makes the emptiness feel solvable, so you follow it. You change the setting, you change the people, you look for something that feels more aligned, more real, more capable of filling whatever it is that seems to be missing. But what's difficult to ignore after enough time passes is that the pattern itself doesn't really change. The details shift, the context evolves, even the version of you within those moments feels slightly different each time. And yet, the same quiet sense returns, not loudly, not dramatically, but with a kind of consistency that becomes harder to dismiss as coincidence. And at some point, almost reluctantly, the question begins to turn in a different direction. It stops being about what you need to add or improve and starts to feel like it might have something to do with the way the experience is unfolding in the first place, in a way that isn't immediately visible, but keeps shaping how everything feels once it's over. What begins to emerge, if you stay with that question a little longer, is that the problem doesn't quite sit where you initially expect it to. It doesn't seem to come from the people or the quality of the interaction, or even from how meaningful the experience was while it was happening. There's something else that sits underneath all of that, shaping the way the experience unfolds without ever fully announcing itself. And it has less to do with what you are doing and more to do with how you are positioned within it. Because over time, without really noticing it, you begin to relate to your life as if it is something that belongs to you, something that needs to be managed, shaped, improved, and ultimately made meaningful through your own effort. Your time becomes something you are responsible for using well. Your relationships become something you are supposed to get the right kind of feeling from. Your experiences become something that should in some way justify themselves by how much they give back to you once they are over. And once that orientation is in place, it doesn't stay on the surface. It follows you into the moment itself. Even when you are sitting with friends, even when you are laughing, even when nothing appears to be wrong, there is often a subtle layer running in the background, a kind of quiet awareness that keeps returning to you, to how you feel, to whether what is happening is enough in some way that is difficult to define. You might not hear it as a clear thought. It doesn't always show up as a sentence, but it moves through the experience anyway, shaping it from the inside, creating a slight distance between you and what is actually happening, as if part of you is no longer fully inside the moment, but standing just outside of it, watching, measuring, waiting for something to confirm that this, whatever this is meaningful enough to matter. And when the moment ends, that distance becomes easier to notice. What was once something you were inside of becomes something you are now looking back on, something you begin to interpret, to evaluate, to quietly compare against an expectation that was never fully clear, but was always there. And somewhere in that shift, something subtle is lost, not in the moment itself, but in the way you were able to be inside it, in a way that only becomes noticeable once it's already gone. Even after you begin to notice this pattern, something about it doesn't immediately resolve. You still go out, still meet people, still find yourself in moments that feel genuinely alive while they're happening. And for a while, it even seems like you've understood something. As if staying a little more present, thinking a little less, or holding onto the moment just slightly longer might allow it to finally feel complete in a way it didn't before. But what's strange is that the same feeling returns anyway, not suddenly or dramatically, but in that quiet, familiar way that almost feels expected, as if something inside you has already learned the rhythm of it. The way every experience, no matter how meaningful it felt at first, gradually settles into something more ordinary, something that no longer carries the same weight it once did. And when that happens, your attention shifts almost without you deciding to. You begin to wonder if maybe the problem was the situation, or the people, or the depth of the interaction. And before you fully realize it, you find yourself adjusting again, looking for something that might feel more real, more lasting, more capable of holding whatever it is that seems to open up afterward. But in that movement, something subtle begins to change. The experience is no longer simply something you are inside of. It becomes something you are relating to, something you are trying to receive a certain feeling from, something that quietly has to justify itself by what it leaves behind. And once that shift takes place, it becomes increasingly difficult for the moment to remain as it was, because it is now being observed, measured, and gently compared to an expectation that is never fully defined, but always present in the background. Over time, this creates a kind of exhaustion that is difficult to point to directly, because it doesn't come from doing too much, but from constantly being aware of yourself within everything you do, from carrying this silent pressure that every experience should eventually resolve into a sense of completeness that never quite arrives. And eventually, it begins to feel less like something is missing from your life, and more like there is a kind of space that was always there to begin with, something no experience was ever meant to fully eliminate, which is why no matter how many times you try to fill it in different ways, through different people, through better and better versions of the same pursuit, it never quite disappears in the way you expect it to. The emptiness then starts to feel less like a problem to solve, and more like what remains when everything else fades, a quiet gap that becomes visible precisely because there is nothing left to distract you from yourself. And after a while, it begins to feel less like something you need to fix, and more like something that was never quite being approached in the right way to begin with. As if the entire effort had been quietly organized around the assumption that your life was supposed to arrive somewhere. That at some point, through enough experiences, enough connection, enough meaning, everything would finally settle into a sense of completeness that no longer left anything unresolved. But as time passes, that imagined point becomes harder to locate, not because it is far away, but because it never quite takes shape in the way it was expected to. And the feeling you've been trying to get rid of begins to shift in how it appears, losing some of its urgency, becoming less like a sign that something is missing, and more like a kind of space that quietly reveals itself whenever there is nothing else pulling your attention outward. And in those moments, when your attention is no longer circling back to you, when you are not watching yourself from a distance or measuring what you are getting from the experience, there is a subtle change that happens without effort, where the pressure begins to loosen and the need to interpret or evaluate what is happening gradually falls away. What remains in that space is not an intense feeling or a sense of resolution, but something quieter and more stable, a kind of presence that doesn't rely on whether the moment is meaningful, exciting, or memorable, and doesn't ask to be held onto in order to feel real. It has a different quality to it, one that doesn't feel achieved or constructed, but simply noticed, as if it had always been there, just outside the focus of where you were looking. And perhaps that is why the moments that stay with you tend to be the ones where you were no longer positioned at the center of your own experience, not because you disappeared, but because you were no longer the reference point everything had to return to. And in that space, the question of whether something is missing doesn't really arise in the same way. Not because everything has been filled, but because the need to fill it has quietly fallen away.